Hello gamers, my name is Duma and welcome to the Game Room. I am excited about today. Please give me just a minute to explain all what's going on. This is a busy video with 4 setups. Thank you for your patience, by the way. Some of you have been waiting on this one for a while now. Back in April, I posted this updated PvP PvE build, and this one is special. It's got some unique stuff going on. Since posting it, I took the time to see how viable the build would be on every class in the game. I quickly found the Sorcerer to be a huge standout. I enjoyed it so much that during all this time, when we were pumping out all these builds for pre-Gold Road, this is what I was doing on my own time. This was my personal PvP build no one else really had. I shared it eventually after people started asking about it on Discord and stream, but for the most part, it's been buttoned up and my own personal thing. I spent quite a lot of time in the recent months developing this out, and here recently been developing it further with Scribing and for PvE as well. This is where we landed with the build versions today. A 2-bar PvP build, a 1-bar PvP build, a 1-bar PvE Solo Build, and a 1-bar PvE Group DPS build. All with mostly the same gear and playstyle, the few changes between builds, as well as some miscellaneous stuff like food, CP, and some skills. I want to make it very clear what this build is so there's no confusion. This is a PvP build for both BGs and Overworld that can also tackle PvE really well, but its core strength is in PvP. That said, there's lots of ways to improve it further for solo content and DPS, should you want to lean into that more than PvP. I playtested it in all the usual PvE places, live on stream in the past few weeks. Veteran Maelstrom and Vattershrin was a total breeze, and then I spent some more time parsing on stream finding the best combos for damage with minimal changes and ended up at a respectable level of DPS, all things considered, with tons of survivability. Then took it to Veteran Dungeons with some of the Gamer members, and it chopped through everything without issues. It's a high APM run and gun finesse build though, with some quirks to make it work properly, especially on the PvP side of things. I'll cover some of that here for you as well today. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm going to be moving quick, but don't forget to check out the written guide over at thegameroom.tv if that's something that you need. Okay, let's dive in. This character overview here will apply to both the 2 and 1-bar PvP versions. There's no change between them here. For our race, I really feel Imperial is most ideal here if you want to min-max this. This is a very resource-hungry build, and Imperial lets you play just a bit more aggro and a bit better defensively. Don't worry if you don't have Imperial, any stamina-based race will work fine. Honestly, even if your Sorcerer is a Magicka-based race, that shouldn't stop you from trying out the build. There's lots of benefits for a bit bigger mag pull and mag sustain on the setup, even though we're primarily stamina. It's ran off of split resources, and at times, both resources will be totally gassed. Also, as you can see here on the attributes, I added a bit more Magicka for better flow for the build. So if your race has Magicka already, you can just subtract those out for more stamina. There's lots of sliding scales in here for race and personal preference, but ideally Imperial is the move here. For health, I suggest 11 points here. This puts you around 28k HP without Boundless Vitality CP for BGs, and about 29.5k with it. Our Mundus will be Serpent, and our food will be Bear Haunch or Jewels of Misrule. You really need one of these 2 foods. You need the health and the double sustain component it offers. For our potions, we have tripods. For our gear, we're using the same setup as the Nightblade, just cleaned up a tiny bit more. Before that though, if you haven't watched that Nightblade video, please take the time to watch this very short clip from it so you understand what's going on. It's critical information for the build so you understand how your sets are working for you, which is fairly unique. Here's the log. This extra craziness is coming from Sheer Venom. Poison Inject keeps both sets of Sheer Venom and Way of Fire proccing for 22 seconds. No matter what the build is, they're gonna feel that. That's going to contribute to a lot of resource drain and attention from almost anyone. They'll be forced to roll more heals, shields, purges, whatever. This is huge pressure in your favor. Now that's one person. How about one button on a whole team in something like BGs? Imagine the team pressure. Now imagine you roll that on both enemy teams. Imagine the map pressure that adds. That's with one button. We haven't even gotten started yet. All right, let's take a look at the actual gear pieces. We have the Way of Fire chest, neck, ring, and bow with Sheer Venom on the pieces around it. For the 2-bar setup, we have either a Maelstrom Restoration Staff or a Potentate's Restoration Staff. We then top that off with a medium helm of your choice with a line of weapon damage. For armor traits, you want Reinforced on the chest and then a mix of Well-Fitted and Divines around it. Well-Fitted will help you with your dodge roll outplays and mobility, and Divines will help you with both sustain and translate perfect over to PvE side of things with a different Mundus. Your bow should be sharpened, your staff powered, and then infused on all 3 jewelry pieces. pieces, of which we'll talk about the mythic in just a moment. For enchants, we try enchant on all armor pieces. I recommend running triple weapon damage enchants, and if you find you need a bit more mag sustain, change as many out as you feel necessary for spell damage enchants. Those enchant names are called increased physical harm and increased magical harm. You want double dot poisons or escapist poisons on the front bar, and then weapon damage enchant on the back bar, or escapist poisons again back here work well. Your mythic should change according to what you're doing and how you're doing it. For overworld PvP like Cyrodiil, Ring of the Wild Hunt I like to use when messing with Zergs or big keep fights where I'm skating around the outskirts picking off targets. You lose some damage, but you gain a ton of mobility. You'll have basically permanent major and minor expedition streaks and then wild hunt. It just makes you a nightmare to even think about chasing. If you want to be a bit more in the thick of it, streaking more in and out of fights, setting up kills, there's a few options. Pale Order works great here, Markin works great, and so does Death Dealers. For BGs, I almost exclusively use Markin on easier games and Gaze of Sithis on harder games. If you want to use Gaze, just add a Way of Fire ring in the open jewelry spot. For CP, it does look very similar to PvE CP with a few tools for PvP. We need the damage here, and you have basically the whole game's worth of mobility tools at your disposal. Your number one strength is speed. Think of it exactly like my Bowblade explanations on CP if you've heard those. Same idea here. If you turtle up here with all the tanky CP, you just won't kill anything. Speed is your main defense. One note I wanted to mention here is higher APM players will benefit great from reaving blows here, and those pushing buttons a little slower will benefit more from focus mending. If you aren't sure where you fall in line at, I would start with focus mending. But if you light weave well in general and you know it, definitely try out reaving blows here. Our abilities are very simple to digest bar to bar. Front bar is gas, back bar is breaks. Front bar all damage, back bar all defense and buffs. For our abilities themselves, we have the centerpiece of the build, and that is poison injection. You want this on everyone around you all of the time. If someone doesn't have numbers ticking on them, shoot them with inject. This will keep both of your gear sets and inject ticking on every target you tap. Your goal is to bleed everything around you and set up quick burst attempts on lower health targets that you can do constantly, and I'll show you in a moment a few examples. Next, we have Camo Hunter for our major savagery buff, Nightblade Flare, and more weapon damage from the Fighter's Guild passive Slayer. This is mostly just a passive ability for you. Our main spammable is Crushing Weapon. It takes a little to get used to it, which I suggest you spend a little time in front of a dummy to get its flow down if this is new for you. But it's a very strong option for this setup for PvP. It's bringing a lot to the table. First, we get solid damage as a spammable. It provides a very important debuff of Major Breach, reducing enemies' resistances. We get an additional, a bit random damage source from the Psijic passive Spell Orb, and then a bit of an RNG shield to soak up some damage on the fly with blocks from the Psijic passive Concentrated Barrier. Frags, we're going to use the procs for our burst kill attempts, and then Streak for mobility and stuns. You can also use the Ball of Lightning morph in Cyrodiil to basically seal the deal of you never being caught. For our ultimate, I like to use Dawnbreaker here, more Fighters Guild passive weapon damage, and additional stun and melee range without having to use Streak. Let's go over a bit of offensive play here with the front bar. The general idea is very simple. It's two parts. Part one is to dot everything with inject and send damage down range into targets with crushing. You're going to end up with lots of kills over time just from passive dot pressure in this way. But what you're really doing is looking for part two, and that's your frag procs. Every single frag proc is a full burst attempt available to you, so you can do it constantly. This is how it works. You always want to be scanning for kill targets, which is anything with a missing chunk of health or squishies that you've already identified around you. You want to be sneaky with the burst attempt and not always just tunnel into them. So if I'm in a BG and dotting people up, I'm looking to kill Skull over to my left, but I'm not letting them know that by my actions and positioning. I'm keeping damage on them, and as soon as I feel the moment is right with the frag proc up, boom, pivot, streak, stun, and delete, and then get out of there. There's lots of layers in that burst combo that you can do to pack in a lot of surprise damage. There are very simple ones for learning players and very complex ones for our seasoned gamers. I'll show you two different levels of combos. An example of a simple, minimally effective one would be to simply streak, stun, frag, and dip. An example of a more complex one would be to pre-crushing light weapon weave your streak with your frag proc as you land, followed by the inject on the dip. And then there's everything in between, along with various ways to work in Dawnbreaker. Sometimes you can also just train someone down too with unhealable damage safely from range. Regardless of what you're doing and how you're doing it, positioning and mobility is priority number one for the build. Our back bar is our stay alive and buff bar. First, we have Dark Deal. I encourage you to really read this ability, understand it, and play with it a bit because it is a channeled ability which can mess up your flow if you aren't used to it. Smart uses of this can go a long way. It's both a burst heal of sorts and a source of sustain. It uses your magicka to restore stamina, and the other morph uses your stamina to restore magicka. If you don't have access to Scribing Scribing for the next ability, this will also be your main burst heal. But if you do have Scribing, this is more of a sustain recovery tool that you can spam one resource to get another while also getting heals at the same time. I recommend this morph, but if you find yourself just perpetually gassed with magicka and fine on stamina, you may want to consider the other morph. If you're proficient, you can also keep this rolling for minor berserk and minor force buffs. I would not worry about focusing on that aspect of it though until you're totally comfortable with the whole kit. The other morph is much easier to maintain the berserk buff with double the duration. Healing contingency. This is one of the most broken abilities in all of ESO right now, and it really elevates builds like this. Even though the tooltip is not all that crazy, it is a quite technical ability relative to the rest with some quirks to it, allowing us to do some new things never done before in ESO. I just put out this video to serve as a supplemental guide for it, or this ability for new builds on the channel. I cannot recommend enough that you at least eyeball it if this is new for you, especially the dodge roll section. If you do anything, at least watch the dodge roll section. This ability has a delayed component that allows you to smoothly proc it during your dodge rolls, double cast it in the same global, and all sorts of other fancy ways to utilize its uniqueness. Using this ability properly will unquestionably elevate your play versus not having it. Not knowing how to use it can easily hinder you versus other options. If you don't have access to Scribing, then Green Vigor is the move here, both for a solid heal in the spot and for your minor resolve buff. Here's another little trick that I was using on the build pre-Scribing. I found a lot of the time, especially in overworld, I didn't need the heal on this spot. So instead, I used Bound Aegis on the back bar. This gave me more magicka on both bars that was needed, allowing me to shuffle the few mag points back over to stamina and then receive a permanent passive minor resolve buff on both bars, which is what Vigor was giving you. A solid option for you as well to have one less ability to press if you don't need the heal. Next is Radiating Regen, a heal over time for you and your group, which is also going to proc your Maelstrom staff for constant extra magicka sustain. If you don't need that sustain at all, then you can use something like a Potentate staff or whatever else feels best for you. I run VMA Resto here almost exclusively. A note here, get off your back bar as soon as you can. Refresh buffs, heal if needed, and get back to the front bar. There's almost a 20% crit difference between bars. Don't sit on the back bar unnecessarily. On that note, also be mindful about the easy Resto staff heavy attacks available on the back bar to help restore mag and for the major mending buff for big heals if needed. Next is Crit Surge. Never let this fall off. Be hyper focused on it. This is your major brutality buff and a very strong heal over time that happens passively when you have damage out. Hurricane, also be hyper focused on this as well. This is your main defensive buff of major resolve and your minor expedition buff. Next is our back bar ultimate. Life Giver back here is so good, it's almost a troll ability in games. Reason being is we aren't using our front bar ult to set up kills like a lot of builds. It can accommodate it, but it isn't needed at all. So we're free to dump back bar ults constantly if needed. It's crazy cheap at only 100 ultimate and just floods you with all the heals in the world. You should be mostly immortal for its duration, especially when playing highly mobile. Make sure you morph your combat prayer and healing ward as well, as they will be applied on every ult as well. Use this liberally, don't sit on it. Help your teammates, help yourself. Only 100 ultimate, you'll have it up constantly. Another defensive note is dodge rolls. You should be doing it a lot defensively, especially with healing contingency. And that is also proccing your bow passive of Hasty Prayer for your major expedition speed buff. How much and how little, that's going to depend on each individual person and their ability to sustain the build. This makes a fantastic solo PvP build for Overworld, but be mindful, this isn't a meta arcanist and this isn't a 1vx build where you're out there out tanking and outplaying groups of people. This is a rip and dip build. Soften people up, blow someone up, and get the heck out. Do that on repeat. Don't just sit up in the thick of it unless you have a team around you. And even then, you should be contingency dodge rolling all over the place. Don't tank stuff. That's our weakness. Run away from it and out heal it. The one bar setup is super simple to transition to. Pop on Oak and Soul and put contingency in the place of Camo Hunter. Everything else is the same, including playstyle, minus back bar buff and healing cycling. If you learn how to use contingency, you can have as much effective fun with one bar as two a lot of the times. I've had more or less the same scores, same healing, same KDAs, everything with 1 and 2 bars. Try them both out and see which works better for you. They're both quite busy builds, but the 1 bar version is definitely much more relaxed. I prefer one or the other depending on my mood for the day. For the 1 bar PvE solo setup, we make a handful of changes to accommodate that content on the veteran side of things. For attributes, you can put all of those into stamina if you like. Still use the Serpent Mundus and swap your food food to Artaeum takeaway broth. You also want to add a medium slime crawl helm, and then if you can swing a second bow, precise. If not, your sharpen from PvP is fine. And then there you want the flame enchant. CP is the same across the board other than dropping celerity in the red tree for strategic reserve. If you're familiar with the 2 and 3 button solo builds from the channel recently, same concept here. On this build with your tripods rolling, this is giving you a whopping just shy of 3,900 health recovery, which is a ton of passive healing. This means we never use our ultimate and we just sit on your PvP Dawnbreaker for the passive weapon damage and steroid and passive healing from strategic reserve. If you want to use an ultimate of your choice, swap strategic reserve for whatever you like along with the ultimate of choice. For our abilities, we drop crushing weapon and bring in crystal weapon. We don't need the pin as much, and this will give you a heal on every single spammable global that can be used with no target as well when transitioning to bump your health up if needed using your stamina. Then we drop frags for bound armaments. This stacks as you light attack up to 4 stacks. Use the ability then and it shoots 4 blades at the target, all of them healing you with the Reaving Blow CP. It also gives you more max stamina for more damage. Then we drop streak for silver shards. This is only used as an AoE spammable. When facing mini adds, you use this in the place of crystal weapon. For the rest of the time, it's just another Fighters Guild weapon damage steroid. This can be really handy for things like the final boss of Veteran Batishran. And here's that full setup for you. For the group DPS version for dungeons and parsing, we make a few more changes. Crit helm and bow are definitely ideal here. For CP, we drop Reaving Blows for fighting finesse in the blue tree and swap strategic reserve for bloody renewal in the red tree. You want to bring in the Thief Mundus and swap to Lava Foot Soup for maximum damage, and bring in one of the Atronach ultimates, and then your spammable here will be focused aim. Rotation is as simple as it gets. Keep inject rolling, spam arrows, and use frag procs. It's mostly 3 buttons with one of them a dot and one of them a proc. For AoE situations, same idea with silver shards. On the dummy, this gets you an early spike in the low 90s DPS area, which settles down to about 80k DPS by the time your next ultimate is up for the next spike in DPS. And that is with an incomplete leveled focused aim morph and in most of our PvP gear, including heavy reinforced chest and some well-fitted traits, all mostly with 3 buttons. Crazy good stuff with lots of upward mobility for the setup. And here is that full setup for you as well. And boom, there we go, gamers. Exhausted yet? I am. I'll leave you with a bit of gameplay so you can see it all in action, and don't forget to check out the written guide over at thegameroom.tv if that will be of help for you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day. Cash money Bowsorc build. I'm super excited to put this out. Dude, holy moly, such a clean run, dude.